We go through 5 early round and 5 late round interior offensive linemen next on the Unbearable Sports Podcast.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair.
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron, and welcome to the final draft profile episode that we're going to be doing until the draft. So I'm kind of sad, kind of excited about it as well. And knowing this, the Bears are probably going to draft an edge rusher because we didn't cover it at all during this. But welcome back. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to follow us. We have this podcast out on all podcasting platforms. And thank you all so much for listening. It means so much. But let's get into this interior offensive line class. To me, this is actually one of the most important spots because the Chicago Bears need a guard. If you pull up the roster right now, I'm looking at it right now. The Chicago Bears, your starting lineup is Tevin Jenkins, Cody Whitehair, Lucas Patrick, Dakota Dozier, and Larry Borum. Now, one of these guys definitely needs to go, and that's Dakota Dozier. Dakota Dozier is not a good player, so to me, the Bears need a starting right guard. Ask any Minnesota Vikings fans. My in-laws are Vikings fans. I know that they're not big fans of Dakota Dozier, but they are fans of Dakota Dozier being on the Bears if that means the Vikings have to go against him. Like I said, not a good player, so the Bears need to find a starter out of this interior line spot, or you could even potentially draft a tackle and then maybe move a Larry Borum over to that right guard spot. We don't know. We don't know what Ryan Poles is going to be doing, and that's what's going to make it so interesting. But I do want to bring up a couple other things because the Bears did actually add an extra lineman to this team that we haven't talked about too much, and that's Julian Davenport. Now, the way that I kind of see Julian Davenport, he's a swing tackle. You don't want him starting because when he has started, I heard the stats that it's like he's given up, I think, the third most pressures when he's starting. So basically, when he starts, you don't want him to start. So similar to like a Dakota Dozier, you want those guys to be your backups. But I do think that Julian Davenport at least gives you some flexibility at that swing tackle position. Because do you want Tyrone Wheatley or Pig Simmons to be your backup swing tackle? Maybe, maybe not. Julian Davenport is still better than a Simmons from what we've seen on tape. But when we're looking at this team as well, you're looking at the guard spots. Willie Wright and Dieter Iselin are your backup guards. Now, that's why I think that Dakota Dozier more so should be that backup kind of swing guard, if you will. And then Mustipher is your backup to Lucas Patrick. One thing that I'm just going to call out too, Patrick also has experience at being a guard. So if they don't get somebody, does he swing out there? I would hope not, because it sounds like the Bears basically have said, you're going to be our center. So we'll see what they end up doing, but let's actually talk through some of these prospects. And just like what we've always been doing, we're going to be going through who we think is already going to be gone. And then next, what we're going to be doing is going through the 5 early round and then 5 late round players that the Bears could be targeting. So let's go through what guards are probably already going to be gone. And let's start with Zion Johnson out of Boston College. You remember at the beginning of the draft cycle when we were all excited because Zion Johnson was going to the Bears? Yeah, he's not. Chances are he's got all the physical traits you want, just an absolute crazy player. He was the guy that I was all excited about the Bears getting, but now he's pretty much a first round lock. But there are 2 guys that were going to be first round locks that are starting to drop. And that's Kenyan Green out of Texas A&M and Linderbaum out of Iowa. So Kenyan Green was seen as kind of a top 10 type of player. He was a tackle. He was a guard. To me, he's a plug and play type of a guard. He's more of a he was also similar to like a Cody Whitehair where he's played all over the line. So the big thing is just put him at his position and he should do well. He's dropping because he's not like a absolute freak of nature athletically, but when he's played, he's been solid. He's been okay. Is he going to go to the Bears? Probably not. I don't think he's going to drop that far, but we are seeing him drop to that later first round. So that's why just someone to be on the lookout for, because if he's there, it could be a great plug and play starter at that right guard. And there you go, Justin Fields, you're all set and protected a little bit better. But I also want to talk about Linderbaum. We've talked about him before. It's becoming more and more likely that he might not be in this first round. Still in mocks, he's going in the first. But the big reason why he's dropping, he's got small arms. And so a lot of people are saying he just doesn't have that explosiveness, or he's a zone only center. People like the idea of having someone a little bit more flexible, but his size and what he does well, he is just a center. So he lacks that versatility. And that's why a lot of people are saying, I don't want him if he's only a center with tiny arms that can only play a zone blocking scheme, which for us, for Bears fans, that would be excellent. And to me, this is the only center that I would potentially get, that I would really get if I was the Chicago Bears, because Lucas Patrick, you told him, is going to be your center. As far as we know, sounds like it was not necessarily like a promise, but you're going to be our center. So if that's the case and you're a brand new head coach, you don't want to kind of go back on your word. But I think that it's fair if this guy Linderbaum does fall to you, then you go, all right, Patrick, you're a right guard. We had to take this guy up because he's been the best center in college football for the past 3 years, and he's been getting better and better and better. We already know that Iowa linemen are very well coached, and he's definitely that type of a player. So to me, if he drops, you're running up there and you're saying, I don't care, Lucas Patrick, you can move over. So let's just keep on moving forward, though, because those guys are Green and Linderbaum are two guys that could drop, but it's not super, super likely. It's a rare scenario that they would be, but it's still at least a scenario because it could happen. But also, let's go into the 5 early ones. But I also want to add a little bit of details about the types of players that Poles is kind of might be going after, but also what the Packers scheme might be. So we obviously have Getsy coming over from the Packers. We haven't even talked about Luke Getsy too much. We always talk about Poles for this offense, but with Poles, with Getsy, the Packers ran about gap scheme, so really kind of that power about 30% of the time. And really the other percents of the time, it was all that zone running game. But it's a little bit higher than what the Bears were running. I think the Bears were running about 15% gap, kind of that gap power scheme. So a little bit more gap power than what we're accustomed to. So not saying that we should definitely go with a gap guy, but when you start looking at what Ryan Poles was going after in the draft, some people were saying Poles was kind of pulling the strings at Kansas City for drafting some offensive linemen. When they drafted Trey Smith, I believe his name is, from Tennessee, when they got him, he was a tackle that was excelled in the gap power scheme, even though that they played more in a zone blocking scheme at Kansas City. Just something interesting to keep in the back of your mind, that just because we're zone doesn't mean that's the only thing that we're going after. Because if they like a people mover later on in the draft, I think they're still going to go after one. So let's get into the 5 early prospects. One guy that I'm not going to be including is Tyler Smith out of Tulsa. To me, he's a tackle, and I covered him in the tackle one. But also, too, more and more speculation is saying he's going higher and might not be available to the Bears as a whole. And then also another guy I'm not going to cover is Cam Jergens out in Nebraska. Very quick, very fast guy at that center position. To me, I just don't like the idea of drafting a center that isn't named Linderbaum high to then kind of say, Patrick, move over for this guy who might be the guy. So to me, that's why I'm not going to cover him too much, but he's still another good player. He's just a center only. So that's why I'm not necessarily thinking that the Bears would be targeting him, since you have 2 centers that are okay on the roster. So what this does is actually the Bears are really more so targeting people in the 3rd round, just because Tyler Smith was really the only guard, like actual guard prospect that's really around in that 2nd round. Everyone else appears to be going in the 3rd. That's why when I did my little mock draft on Mock Draft Monday, I was having them go with the guard in the 3rd round, because there's really not a lot of talent at that guard position in this second round. There's tackle prospects that you can have, but from a guard perspective, not so much. So I'm more than fine. I want to just kind of preach patience. If the Bears don't go with an offensive lineman in the first two picks, it most likely means they're going to go probably with a guard in the third because that's where some of that depth is. What are the depth guys? What are some of the people that the Bears could be going after? So let's actually start with Ed Ingram out of LSU. We have not talked about him going to the Chicago Bears yet. He is typically going about 78, 77 type of range, according to the consensus big board. So he is going to be in the Bears range at that kind of third round pick. So actually, all these guys will probably be available to the Bears at that third round area. But Ed Ingram is 6'3", 312. He would be kind of a higher selection, like a little bit high if the Bears ended up picking him up in the third round. He started out as a true freshman, but then the following year had 2 accounts of aggravated assault against a minor, and all those were dismissed, but it caused him to miss the entire 2018 season, and then he had to kind of fight back and be a starter. So, good thing he actually got that starting position. He started at both guard spots, but predominantly played at that left guard area. He has a lot of really good pop, which you love to see, so is able to kind of smack people in the face, kind of move people back, which is what you want to see. And honestly, what I like about him is he shows that he could start day one for you. So that's why I do like Ed Ingram, because he just seems like a good just starter. You draft him and you're like, he's our starter, and we got him in the third round. This is a good day. But the only thing that's the downside is he really hasn't shown a lot of progression. When he started as a freshman, you can't necessarily stack up his games and say, here's this notable progression that I see on tape. That's why he is going in the third round, because people are saying, yeah, it's like when we were talking about Quay Walker and the other linebackers. This guy has a really high floor, which is excellent, but you're not seeing a lot of that progression. You're not seeing him kind of take his game to the next level. And he was playing at LSU, which is a very good program. He's got access to good coaches. Why is he not getting better year over year? That's some of the big questions, but still somebody that could come in and at least start over a Dakota Dozier. But let's move on to our second guy that's out here, and that's Sean Rhyan out of UCLA. This guy is big. This guy is thick. He's 6'5", 323. And when you look at him, like, he played left tackle for UCLA, but when you just see him out there, I've never had a guy that when you look at him and you just go, he's a guard. You see him, yeah, I just nodded my head. I was like, because I was debating, I'm like, oh, is he really a guard? Because I know some people say, he's a tackle until proven guard. You see him and you go, that dude's a guard for sure. But he's someone that is typically going at the end of the third round. So yet again, but actually the Draft Network has him going in the second, late second, which I think is a little bit crazy. But that's where a lot of these guard prospects, you don't know where they're going to be going. That's why he could be available in that early third that the Chicago Bears have. His average range is about 96 to 98. But some of the pros, a very aggressive, like a former rugby player that really has that mauler mentality, that scrum, as they call it, where he's able to kind of push people back. A very athletic guard as well, which you love to see. So athletic, physical, aggressive. You can really start to see that this guy has all the traits. And Trey Smith, when he was with Kansas City, was a left tackle that they moved over to right guard. Now, we did also have some guard versatility, but still, you had this guy that is able to most likely move over, shift over, and potentially be a right guard for you. Now, the issues is that he's only got 2 snaps at right guard, so it's really more of a projection, but also not crazy length. So, like, length from an arm perspective. So that's just, you like his feet, you like the way that he's able to maul some people. It could be a really good find at this third round range. When you're comparing him to Ingram, Ingram's got the high floor. I think that Ryan has a lot more higher. He's got a higher ceiling from an overall blocker perspective. Now, we still have 3 more guards. And yet again, this is what I'm saying. There's a lot of really good guard prospects that the Bears can get in the third round. I hope that they're looking at this going, Yeah, we could get some other extra talent in that second round or trade back and potentially pick up some of these people. Next guy on our list is Darian Canard out of Kentucky. He typically is going at the 81 spot, but also he's 6'5", 328. And the way to describe this guy, he's a nasty blocker. He is absolutely nasty, just a very physical guy that just dominates with his overall strength. He was 345 pounds and he slimmed down to 328 and looks to be carrying the weight very well, but still has some of his power. Now, PFF's grades is that every single year he was a 90 plus graded blocker. They haven't had somebody like that this year in the draft. Just an absolute beast from that run blocking perspective. Played the right tackle, most likely should shift into the right guard area. Now, so like we're saying, just an absolute physical freak, just starts to manhandle people. But there was something that he kind of reminded me of. Now, I don't know if you guys remember if you were playing basketball in high school or like a pickup game or intramurals in college, there's always like the football players that just were like overly physical, but not good basketball players. Kennard to me is kind of like that, but from a football perspective, where he's this super, super physical guy, but he doesn't have the fundamentals of football down. He wins with his nasty, with his just trying to out physical you, out grit you at the point of attack, which is awesome, but you got to learn some fundamentals. So a coach might see this and say, I can teach him some of this. He's somebody that can win in a phone booth, but as soon as he's out of that phone booth, cannot win at all. So that's why a lot of people say, yes, he's got probably the size to play a right tackle, but he really doesn't have the feet to play a right tackle spot. He really is best suited at that guard. Anytime that I saw him take on a pass rusher in a true pass set, so like a third down, third and long, I just held my breath. I'm like, I don't know how he's going to do this. If somebody's trying to run around him in the NFL, they'd run right around him. So that's why he's best suited as a guard. And that's why I think that really he could be a good guard for us, really nasty guard. But another thing, too, I want to just call out as a con as to why he's dropping is that when he went to the combine, pretty much every athletic score, like every drill, he scored in the bottom 25%. So from an athletic perspective, not really what you want to see out of a prospect, but he's got all the nastiness. He doesn't have fundamentals, doesn't have athletic, not very athletic, but he's just nasty. That's what got him through it, and he's got great tape of him just bullying people. So it's a very tricky prospect, Darian Canard out of Kentucky. But let's keep moving on. So going from one guy who's not athletically gifted to one of the most athletically gifted prospects out there, and that's Dylan Parham out of Memphis. Consensus board has him going about 95. These guard prospects were always so weird to kind of see. PFF has him at 77. The Draft Network at about 62. But this guy has played everywhere. Left guard, right tackle. You love to see it. 6'3", 313. Crazy good athlete. You love to see just the athletic ability that Dylan Parham has. And it seems what Ryan Poles has said is that he likes athletic linemen. So that's all that he's been telling us. But obviously, we're got to see this. Like, is he pulling our legs, or does he really like the athletic offensive lineman? Very good athlete. Really kind of projects to a zone blocking scheme, which is exactly what we should be running majority of the time. So he's not a guy that's going to be pushing people back, even though he's 313 and 313 at 6'3". It's decent size. But honestly, just great hands, can kind of stick in front of the player, and also, like we said too, athletic. So that's what you like to see. But also, the reason why he's dropping, thin upper body. You see him, and he's wiry for an offensive lineman. A lot of people say that he was listed at 285 at Memphis, and then he had to bulk up to 313. So that's why a lot of people are saying, yeah, he's just a zone guy, and we didn't necessarily see the size that we wanted to. And a lot of experts are saying this guy's a center, even though he's never played center. So that's why you throw in the lack of competition that he played at Memphis and this center only build that he's never played center. That's why a lot of people are a little bit more like, I don't really want to test him. But he's got the athletic ability, and it looks like he has added his weight to 313, so he should be all ready and set to go at that right guard spot. Like, yet again, another upside guy. I don't love him as the other ones, but still a very interesting prospect. Now, the last one, yet again, I go through 5. The last one that I want to talk about is Cole Strange out of Chattanooga. I had him selected in one of the mock drafts, and I think that Ryan Poles is going to love this guy. The one thing that he really did talk about in some of his press conferences is that he wants somebody that's got the burst. And when you hear what people have talked about with like a zone blocking scheme, you want somebody that can quickly get out of their stance and just pop somebody in the mouth. Cole Strange, a former defensive end, has crazy explosiveness, crazy like jump off the line, hit the guy first in the face. And that's what a lot of offensive line coaches you can't teach. So if you can teach this guy out of Chattanooga that he can, how to actually be a very good blocker, you have the explosiveness. His size is okay, 6'5", 307, so he's got a little bit of length to him, a little bit of size, just could probably afford to add a little bit more weight to him, but really has a very good upside as this sort of pick. Just needs a little bit more coaching. Great reach, great quickness, can really kind of get to every level of the field. But he's 24 years old. You didn't see him absolutely dominate at Chattanooga. He was good, but you didn't see domination for a 24-year-old going against some lower level competition. And some people say too, he's the perfect type of person to be a center, another center guy. We have another quick guy that could be a center. And that's why I think that the Bears are probably looking at this going, that explosiveness you just can't teach. And that's why we got to add him on. So let me know what you guys think for some of these guard and center prospects that we're kind of going through. These are some of the early rounders. The only other one that I didn't really talk about is Jamari Salyer. We've talked about him a lot out of Georgia. A bigger type of guy. And I laughed at this because PFF's comp for him is Larry Borum. So if we've seen Larry Borum, just imagine Larry Borum playing guard. That's pretty much Jamari Salyer. So yet again, another guy who started at the tackle position, but projects best as a guard, similar to Larry Borum. A lot of people said he was just going to be a guard, but he's been playing tackle for us and, it was okay. But let's go to the late round guys. So 5 late rounders. This was insanely hard because, like I said before, a lot of guards are going in the 3rd, and there's also a lot going in the 4th. So this was really hard because Zach Tom I didn't necessarily bring up because I think that he's later in the 3rd round and even some in the 4th. Some people like him as tackle. Chris Paul was going a little bit higher, or we've already covered Chris Paul and Thayer Munford out of Ohio State. There's a lot of guys. There's a lot of guys. So you're definitely going to have to let me know some of your favorites. But let's start this off. So starting with number 1, we have Logan Brus out of Wisconsin. He's a right tackle, right guard type of versatility. And this guy, a lot of people are split on saying that he is a tackle. No, he's a guard. So he should be able to play kind of both positions and compete at both. I always love that with a later round guy because then you have a little bit of competition against Larry Borum and you have a little bit of competition, or hopefully no competition, against a Dakota Dozier. So he's typically going around the 5th, or you would probably have to use your early 5th rounder to get a player like this. Good athlete, stays on his feet, so just great balance. You always want to see your lineman not on the ground. And that's when you watch the tape, never on the ground, always on his feet. Always love to see it. Has great burst. Yet again, for an offensive lineman, can kind of push some people, but also the only thing that I don't like about it is he's not, even though he's got this burst and he can accelerate to hit somebody, he doesn't necessarily move a lot of people, but he gives you great feet, great mirror ability, but also very highly disciplined, doesn't get penalized a lot. And also too, one of the big cons is that he lets defenders really kind of hit him and kind of control his chest. So a lot of people are getting his hands in his chest, and from there, you can kind of shift him around and move him basically wherever you want. So there's some downsides to him, especially with Wisconsin, because Wisconsin, it's an off-brand Iowa when it comes to the offensive line prospects, where a lot of times Wisconsin has good, well-coached offensive linemen. So to me, is there more that you can teach them? Probably, but still not a true people mover, but at least has some good feet for somebody that you can get in the 5th rounder. So next guy is a Marquis Hayes out of Oklahoma. The big thing, he's a left guard. So he's a guy that has elite hand usage, long arms, incredible pass protector. That's where he wins. He's a good pass protector guy, so he'll at least keep Justin Fields clean. He's also just seen as a left guard. So a lot of people don't really love the fact that, okay, I can get this guy in the 5th round and you're telling me he's just a left guard. I want to see that versatility, because if he's not a starter, I want him as a backup, and I want him to be a backup for my left guard and right guard. How big of a deal is that? That's up to you to decide, because, or actually really Ryan Poles to decide, because that's why this guy is kind of dropping. He's also heavily penalized, so a lot of people don't love that he's heavily penalized. Not explosive, doesn't get quick out of his stance, doesn't get low, so really from a run blocking perspective, somewhat of a liability. Like I said before, really accelerates when he's kind of hand fighting with people in pass coverage. So you have this guy very good in the pass area, but not so much in the run. And that's why we see him dropping. Not a complete type of guard prospect that you would like to see, but has good size at 6'5", long arms, and that's where he has definitely good upside later on. Now, next guy that we're going to be talking about is so interesting. I strongly suggest to look up his film, and that's Jason Poe out of Mercer. He is 6'1", hardly 300 pounds. I don't know if 300 pounds really is how big he actually is. So he's a small guy. He's a very small guard. And my God, this guy is fun to watch, because he really kind of went on the scene when he just had an overall dominant performance against Alabama. And people are like, who is this guy? Because he is an incredibly twitched up type of player. I know a lot of people say this term twitched up. You watch him and you're like, I was like, okay, now I get the term. He just seemed like he was twitchy and just crazy speed, constantly moving, always trying to like smack somebody in the face. Looked like he just had a pound of pre-workout and just went crazy out there on the field. But that's how he plays. He's just flying and just very good athletically to just be popping people in the face. Some of the cons, undisciplined. You watch him, it looks like somebody who just discovered the hit stick on Madden. He is just flying and just all out blocking. You don't see a lot of him just getting his hands on people. He's always trying to go for the big hit. So he's someone that can he burst onto the scene from a Mercer perspective. He was at community college, then Lenore Ryan, then Mercer. So you want to see a little bit more tape on him, but he is somebody that somebody could fall in love with because of his speed, because of his pop, and they can say, I can teach him how to use his hands, but his athletic ability, you can't teach that, because he, like I said, incredibly fast, incredibly quick for a guard. Now, as we continue to go through some of these players, I want to just talk about Josh Ezadu out of UNC. We talked about him during the mock draft a little bit. Left tackle, left guard, played a little bit of right tackle last year. Excelled in a zone blocking system, but also a very big guy. Reminds me a little bit about Trey Smith a little bit, where coming out, people said that he's too slow. He's very top heavy. That's exactly what Josh Ezadu from UNC is all about. He projects to the gap scheme, same with Trey Smith. And I think that Poles might be looking at this guy going, he reminds me a lot of another player who had the versatility, who was top heavy, who was very powerful, in a Trey Smith. So I think that the Bears might want to try and go after this guy, and you could get him in probably the 6th round. It's really with a lot of these guys, it's hard to kind of know where they're going. He could be for you in the 6th round and could legitimately compete for a starting guard spot for you because he's played very well and can really move people. But like I said, too, excelled in his zone blocking scheme, even though that he projects best to a gap scheme. It's a good problem to have. I'm not going to lie. But then the last guy that we're going to cover is Cade Mays out of Tennessee. Yet again, I'm talking about Trey Smith a lot because they did draft him from Tennessee. Cade Mays, 6'4", 311, 4-year starter. He was at Georgia and then transferred over to Tennessee and was instantly listed as a starter. Another guy better listed for the gap scheme, very aggressive type of player at that guard spot. Was more of a tackle, but I could see him playing that guard spot, that right guard spot perfectly. And honestly, very similar to some of these other guys that we talked about when he's in a true pass set. Just, 3rd down, 3rd and long, you don't see great feet. You don't see great quickness that you would like to see out of a guy that you're drafting, but still, that's the reason why he's going later. Still overall, though, a very good player, and can at least move some people. So that's why I think polls might be saying, I watched him play with Trey Smith. I was thinking, who is this guy? Another guy that you can get in the 6th round that can add a little bit of depth to this guard position. So that about does it. We've seriously went through, I think, honestly, about 200 different prospects throughout this. Thank you all so much for listening. We've been going through a lot. And make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to follow us on all podcasting platforms or whatever you listen to. Thank you all so much. It's draft season, baby. And Unbearable Sports Podcast, we're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.
Thank you for listening to this Belly Up Sports Podcast Network product. Some said we go belly up, so we made it our name, and we're still here.